So we'll kind of commence now. I don't really want this to take longer than an hour, because as anyone who was in my Java class last night, might have blown your brains out the back of your skull a little bit with the weight of the material. I don't want this to feel that heavy, and it's not necessarily supposed to be an all-encompassing coverage of every possible aspect, right? It's like a high-level informational piece that will allow us to know things about this particular tool chain, Middleman, so that then we can work towards building websites faster, understand more about modern web technologies. As we step forward, we want to do Sinatra next, which is another Ruby tool. And the only reason I'm doing this in Ruby is because I know Ruby really well. I think it has lower overhead than, say, something like Java, which I've also done web development in. But I want you to have to know as little as possible to be then successful at these things, because then you can branch off to whatever you want, right? But you know that you have this base understanding of these core concepts which are applicable everywhere. After that, I'd like to move into Rails, which is kind of like the marriage of this static web-based content stuff plus the dynamic request routing and accessing databases and doing interesting things like that. So, for this class we need, for this meeting, to edit that out, politics. For this meeting you need Ruby installed and you need Middleman installed, which is a gem. I'm pretty sure in here, and I'll just double check because I wrote these slides recently, so I don't pretend that I am perfect and remember everything. And I do have a slide for installing Middleman at some point. My first thought about this was to just kind of throw a whole bunch of facts at you, and then we would try some stuff. And since then, I've kind of rolled back on that a little bit. What I'd like to do instead is just, we'll talk a little bit, we'll do a little tiny hands-on, like we'll touch some things, and then we'll do a little bit more thought process, and then at the very end, we're going to sit and we're like, think up what a standard website design would be, and we're just going to try to implement it with the tools that we have in front of us. So my goals for when you're done here is that you're not going to know everything. You're probably going to know very little. That's okay. But you're going to know where to get all the resources and how to learn about the tools and what are like key places that might help you expand your knowledge on your own. But also then have a group of peers with you can ask questions of, which is super nice. In my classes, many of these people have been in my classes. I run a Gitter channel for my classes, just an open chat room, right? Because when I was a software engineer, not too long ago, right, like 3 months ago, that's what we did. All of our office communication happened in chat. And I think the same thing can happen pretty much in any organization. And if you've ever tried to communicate with a new language community, they use IRC still. So Internet Relay Chat from the 70s even is still a very popular medium. So when we use Middleman, which I'm going to refer to kind of as a tool chain, which may be an alien term if you haven't done a lot of development. Tool chain is an organization of tools with which we use to simplify the development part, right? So like gives us more time working on the business side, less time working with the computer, like the technical side of how everything integrates. Middleman is a prepackaged bit of beauty that kind of has it all set up for us. It's got a lot of flexibility, it's got a lot of support. It, like our group, is open source oriented. Ruby is very much that way. And because it's easy to use, because it's got lots of awesome tools, it makes us happy. And something that Ruby is well known for is developer happiness. So you'll find that people intentionally write software that is pleasant to use, right? Which maybe not, and I don't want to make that sound like your C# community has no interest in making software that's usable and makes people happy, but I sometimes think that that's not their first concern, is how to get their library or their software up and running. And they're more interested in maybe features or performance. Ruby is not a very performant language, so that kind of stuff doesn't immediately happen up front. So the better tools that I'd like to introduce is Haml, the concept of templating, Sass, and sprockets. Now Sprockets is on there because we are going to use it. Sprockets is a manner of kind of organizing assets. So if you've done a website, the assets are things like files and images, style sheets, and JavaScript. Right? So it's kind of a organizational tool. I list it there because we're going to see it again in Rails. There are certain libraries that are pretty much ubiquitous in web development between all these frameworks. So, Haml. Haml is an abstraction version of HTML. I hope at this point you've all touched HTML a little bit. Your concept of opening and closing tags and adding attributes and the numerous elements. All Haml is a shorthand way of generating that same output. Now, because it's being pre-processed, right? So it's going to turn whatever you say in Haml into HTML in the end. It allows us to put some logic in there before things happen. And that's where our templating comes into play. So templating lets us break out repetitive pieces of our structure in HTML into smaller pieces that then can be shared. You know, back in the day, they used to teach Dreamweaver a lot. And Dreamweaver had a concept called templates, site templates. And it got poo-pooed a lot, but effectively this is the re-envisioning of the exact same technology. Except it doesn't rely on any specific platform to develop them or edit them in, so you're not version bound by a Dreamweaver version. You just are version bound by whatever your preprocessor is, and they're generally pretty good at semantic versioning, so therefore they're not going to go ahead and change the world in between, you know, your times through things. And then Sass, which is probably going to be the largest topic you're going to see tonight, but we're just going to touch on it. It's huge. So just like Haml is a preprocessor for HTML, Sass is a preprocessor for CSS. CSS is well known to being intentionally logicless. Right? It is style only. It has no concept of functions or abstraction that we normally find everywhere else in programming. It's done that way somewhat to mirror the way HTML is, which also kind of lacks any logic. All right, that's kind of stuff we're going to kind of delve into here. So Middleman. We already have our Ruby environment. A Middleman comes to us in a gem. If you do Java, those libraries are called jars. Like DLLs in C, C#, if you're on Windows. They are source code, pure source code. So there's nothing abstracted, there's nothing compiled in a gem. Think of it a little bit, so it's part of the dependency manager of Ruby, comes with Ruby, it's free. Think of it a little bit like an app store, kind of. Some things inside of the gems are software that you can run, that you can use, and the rest of them are things that you might write code on top of. So it kind of like lives in two worlds. It's a bit of library, it's a bit of application. Middleman lives in that world of being something that includes a generator, which we'll use to help us get our project bootstrapped quicker. Now, as far as an editor, you could really use anything that can open and read text files. I like Sublime Text, Mel likes Atom. You get to choose whatever you like. My examples will mostly be in Sublime because I know it best, but that doesn't mean you have to do what I do. Right? I need a web browser which is probably needs to be greater than IE9. You don't have to be, I'm just trying to promote everyone to migrate off of IE9. So this is a little bit of interactive piece. We're going to do stuff on our computer. So we'll take the amount of time we need to do this. We want to install Middleman, for those who haven't. We want to spin up a new project. And we want to run it. So we can see what it looks like out of the box. Right? So for those of you who have not installed Middleman, but have Ruby, you need to bring up a command prompt. I think that the Ruby installer gives you like a git bash, or I'm pretty sure Ruby installer or Rails installer both give you some kind of extra command line tool.
The interactive Ruby.
That would not be the right thing. So let's see what we got. I think it's in the same folder. Site generator. So inside the source directory of your project, which we'll look at, there's a lot of interesting files that aren't all necessarily HTML, not all necessarily CSS. When we do a build, they're all going to be compiled to HTML, CSS, JavaScript. And they're going to be in a format that you can just put them on a web server as static files. You know, nothing fancy, and kind of stuff you can get on GoDaddy for, what, $5 a month or something like that, most places. Free hosting. Now, or cheap hosting. Now on GitHub, you can use GitHub Pages, which, given we don't get, you know, like too locked up on other things, we can get through some of this other material. Show you how to set up. There's actually another gem that the Middleman group has. It's called Middleman Deploy. And one of its default features is being able to say Middleman Deploy. It'll just push it to GitHub, and you get a public website that's on the internet. That's pretty cool. My opinion. I should put it this way. I'm currently running a web business that uses Middleman as GitHub Pages as my web server, as my web host. Grab a seat, Dave.
I was late, my car decided to have a flat tire and had to have emergency surgery.
Did you get too terribly lost? I just got your message.
Yeah, I got terribly lost.
Okay. Not too terribly lost, I guess. Only maybe 20 minutes worth. So, some of the important items if you look through that folder. So, let's take a moment and let's open up Sublime or Atom. And let's use it to kind of inspect the directory that we created. So what I like to do is I like to open up Sublime Text. I go to Project. I go to Add Folder to Project. And then I select, you know, like Learn Middleman, for example.
My computer was dead because I had unplugged it last night to let it breathe. I forgot to plug it in this morning.
Oh. Look out. I got you.
It was a bad day.
Oh, okay. I understand.
It was a bad day.
I understand.
Just open that folder as a project.
Right. So in Sublime Text in the File menu, there's a Project option, and you can go to Add Folder to Project from there.
What folder are we adding as a project? The one that you just made?
Oh, we've already done this, haven't we? We had other problems. We also had our problems. So actually, though, you want to go on the one directory. You're looking at the source. You would like to be just at the root of the project.
Yes. Apparently they're different.
Because you should be able to see a config.rb file. Yep, right there.
What website can I go to download Sublime?
Sublime Text. Just Google Sublime Text, and the first result will be their website.
Sublime Text.
Sublime Text. Anyways, you should be able to see a config.rb file. If you look inside that, that's probably the closest thing to Ruby that we're going to spend any time with at all. Because the rest of this is all going to be style, layout, markup, you know, the web stuff. You have under the source directory, you have a layouts folder. That's kind of a special kind of place where we're going to build templates that will be shared between our pages.
Click on its under source.
So it's a folder you'll have to expand, source. Yes.
I want to ask a question.
Yeah.
Did you just come up with learn dash minimum that you defined that?
Yeah, I
name?
just
We can
figured
call it
that would be.
anything we
Oh,
want.
absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
You can rename that folder later. It's not attached to that name. But because it's so easy to generate a Middleman project, you can just screw around with this for a bit, feel perfectly comfortable with deleting it, making a new one. Yeah, you should feel. Well, now that we've gotten our over the hurdle, of being able to build native gems effectively. That's all. So inside the source directory though, so you expand that a little bit to the source directory, there's a layouts folder. It's got these .erb files in them. And then we also have what we call assets, right? So we have the JavaScript, style sheets, and the images. And outside of that, we got pages. That's it. So the pages of your website, the things that it might share, and things that might go into those pages. Images, styles, and like interactivity. And all that's bootstrapped by the config RB. So when you do some middleman command, it goes and seeks out the config RB, reads whatever configuration is in there, and then completes the action. We call that bootstrapping. All right, so config RB, these are the way, this is like my basic config RB looks like this. And if you downloaded this project, like downloaded the slides for this, there's a project in there under a source directory, which has this exact same file in there. So probably the only thing different in here than what you have is I've uncommented this activate live reload. It's like a plugin for Middleman. And what it'll do is every time you make a change while Middleman's server is running, it'll reload the web page connected to it. So you could theoretically have code on the left, web page on the right, change some HTML, hit save, web page on the right will just reload. So you get real-time live updates of the things you're changing. This is already in the file. It's just commented out. That means it has little hash marks in front of it.
So you recommend uncommenting?
I do recommend uncommenting it. You know, when we get to actually being able to manipulate some of these files, it's going to help us either identify that we've made an error, it's going to help us see our code, like just see our output. You make less guesswork, especially when we're learning. You know, when you've done this for years, you can write a whole bunch of Java or CSS styles, and you know what it's going to do, and it's going to look right. And you might be off by a couple pixels somewhere, but it's no big deal. When you're starting out, though, you need that feedback loop, right? You need that. I did it right, I did it wrong. I touched this thing, and this thing moved. That's super important, right? That's going to teach you what things do, especially when you're teaching yourself, kind of.
The stuff that's in his is in there.
Did you find what we were looking at, Rhonda, or you?
There's a lot more copies of knowledge generated.
There is, well, because I have a limited amount, so right, your config RB looks different than mine because I have a limited amount of screen space. So I was kind of like giving you the good bits, right? And I killed the comments from it. So all the comments start with those little hashes.
Do you have to restart the server in order to complete these changes?
Yes, that is the one thing that is true, is the config being the bootstrap is not always reread. But all your files in the project are reread. So JavaScript and things like that, all that stuff. Absolutely. Good question. So the layouts. What's with this ERB thing? So we're going to deal with templating languages, which allow us to put variables and data that is not static inside of pages that are static. Now sometimes that's just making the decision of maybe you want it to display the date that it was generated, right? So you might have a little ERB tag that kind of looks like this. It looks like an HTML tag, but it's got a little % symbol inside. If you've done any other kind of web dynamic programming, they have something like this, right? This looks very much like the Java version of it. So Ruby has this natural language for building up templates, and that's an ERB file. I think that ERB files are messy and ugly because not only is it HTML, which is already a bit kind of can get pretty hairy, but now I'm going to add certain elements that have these little % symbols and equal signs, and I might lose track of them, is all. And thankfully, other people feel the same way. So they made this thing called Haml, which is one of the things we're going to talk about. And that's not a problem, though. Haml comes baked into Middleman. It's already ready to work. And what's even cooler is that ERB and Haml can coexist. So even though your project was bootstrapped and came with ERB files, we can write new Haml files and they can live with the ERB files. We can replace the ERB files with Haml files. It's all good, right? Like, this is not something that's going to keep you from moving forward. Now, one thing that's important, if you look at the layout, so layout.html.erb, there is a line in there that does this yield. It's kind of like the key piece of communication between your page and the layout. So, your page is any file not in the layout folder, right, that is html.erb or html.haml. The content of that file will be displayed in the layout wherever that yield is. That's what yield is going to do. It's going to insert the page into the layout, and the output will be the layout with the page inside. Does that make sense? No? So think of layout like a box, right? This is the layout. Right, we have a bunch of little pages, right? Little pages. And whenever we render this, we're going to say, here's yield. Yield will be that page content, right? So we'll have this big box, which contains maybe the navigation, maybe the footer, and this is the about page, right? And it's got a picture and some text, right? So we're going to write these little pages in absence of the layout, because those are the parts of the site that are different. And the parts of the site that are changed, or that don't change as often, like the navigation, the footer, the layout element that is more common in your design, we're going to keep that somewhere else. We're just going to be inserting stuff. Now, you can have more than one layout, but for now, we're just going to treat one layout as the rule. So because we already have a layout, we're probably not going to touch it too much. Just want you to make you aware of it. It's a thing. All right. So let's talk about Haml. I don't actually remember what this stands for. No, do you remember what Haml stands for? Let's not worry about it. Because to be honest, I like their tagline better than I like their name. So they're very short, curt kind of way of describing the same markup you can do in HTML. And so their tagline is a haiku. Beautiful, dry, well-indented, clear markup, templating haiku. So I guess that's really the way they think about themselves, is they're turning HTML into a haiku.
HTML abstraction markup language.
Thank you. It's an HTML abstraction markup language. So here's a little comparison between the ERB file we might see and Haml file. I just pulled this from Haml's website. All right. So as I mentioned, there's these little like percent symbol equal things, and then this would be data that's going to be inserted into the page when we build it. And we have our open and close tags, and everything is nicely indented as it can be. If it doesn't, like hit the edge and have to wrap. I guess it's a div that wouldn't do that. Alternatively, we can write the same information this way. Some of the things that we've been able to avoid. So first, we don't need the special bracket characters. We don't need specific class identifier attributes. We don't need the quotation marks. Elements receive a symbol, that's the percent symbol. So that's body, HTML, div, span, paragraph, anchor, anything like that. We make sure that we tell the system that that's an actual element by putting a percent symbol in it. Classes start like CSS selectors. So a CSS selector, so you're writing CSS, you want a class, you start with a period. Something dot container. Dot container would be your CSS class. When you do an element dot container, it's going to give you that element and attach the class container to it. That's all it's doing. It's trying in some small way to make this a little bit closer to the CSS you might write for that element anyways. We simplify these as well. So that's an element h1. The little equal sign says we're going to evaluate something. And we're going to evaluate the body of that h1 will be post.title. Whatever post is and whatever its title is, will be inserted there. If we did not have the equal sign, it would be the literal text. It would say, post dot title would be this header 1 on the page, as opposed to being substituted because of the equal sign. We also get to avoid writing divs altogether, because most divs, because they're so generic of an object, we almost always give them a class. We just have to type a class name. So dot content will now just create us a div of class content. Simplifies that a little bit. And there's no open and close. It's indentation. Whatever is indented is what's on that level. And that means that this being on a single line means that this is the content of H1. And in this div, right, this evaluated bit is the content of that div. I think in this case, though, I still could have put this on the line above and it would have been valid. But I like to try to kind of keep my divs like divs, but there's arguments. People have opinions. I'm not going to tell you one way to do it or not. All right. So I've kind of covered this. Elements have this little % symbol. There's no open and close. All of our elements. Other templating languages try to avoid that and make it that whatever the first thing on the line, it assumes is an element of any name. That leads to making mistakes. So sometimes you put content on a line, you say something like, hi, my name is, and hi disappears, and my name is gets wrapped in an unknown HTML element called hi. You don't necessarily know why unless you're using Sublime Text. It knows about that particular templating engine and then tells you that you've done it wrong. A lot of ifs there. So right, indentation means nesting. And probably the reason I like Haml so much is because we nest an awful lot in HTML. Really fast to get really deep. But that's a lot cleaner. I don't also have to track where my closing is. I don't care. It's not an issue for me. And this is the nuts and bolts of attributes. So we covered what class attributes look like. They're just like their selector counterparts, and they start with a dot. IDs, also being extremely common, we use a hash symbol for them. So just like the CSS selector, if I want a div of class container of ID menu, it's dot container hash menu. Actually, I think you should invert that and do the ID first and the class second. That's not a rule of the language, that's like a rule of convention. Now, there's a lot of attributes out there that aren't contained in class and ID. And so in that case, we have to learn about Ruby hashes. And Ruby hashes kind of look a little bit like arrays, but they're a key value pair structure. So they're bounded by curly braces. And we use symbols. And so symbol just means that it has a colon. Although it's not required to use a symbol. I like these symbols. So we say something like, we're doing an anchor tag. So we need an anchor, we need a % symbol, right? We need an href attribute. Now I'm going to show you two ways to write this because there are two ways you're going to read this if you're doing documentation. I have an absurdly strong position on which one you should use. But that's okay. You get to do what you want in life. This anchor creates a link that goes back to our Middleman site. Okay. This is called a hash rocket. That symbol tells us that this is the key and that's the value. The little colon tells us that href is a symbol. If we wanted to skip the symbol part, we can just put it in quotes. So it would be string key, string value. That's okay too. I am grossly opposed to hash rockets. I think they are a confusing bit of syntax, and I think that they're too much punctuation, basically. I consider all these things punctuation. In newer versions, and by newer I mean like anything past 1.9, I think, 1.8, supported what's called post-colon notation. And that means that I can make this as a symbol, and it looks exactly like JSON now. So if any of you have familiarity with JSON and what it looks like, it's key colon value. And I'm not going to pretend that that's the reason they made it. They made this alternate syntax, but I pretty strongly believe that that's the reason they made this alternate syntax, is that it was more closely similar to something we saw. It does require that your key be a symbol, though. Yeah, so these two things are semantically identical. So you can have any number of these items to add additional attributes to a hash. You add a comma, another key value, you keep on going. Of all the things I love about Haml, this is probably my least favorite part of Haml. Because as you write more stuff, you're going to add jQuery, you're going to want to include data attributes, you're going to want deeply nested attributes, basically. So a data attribute has a hyphen in it. And that gets messy. How do we render that properly? So to do data attributes in Haml, I'll show this to you and just so you know it's a thing, right? This is like the trouble you might run into. So you have to create, I'm going to use postcolon, you create a key called data. Now a data attribute may be data record ID. Now, I use this to give semantic, or to give actual meaning to an element so that I can re-look up information about an element that's on the screen from the markup later on. This has its use, but a lot of interesting jQuery libraries will often do stuff like this. So in order for me to have this, where data hyphen record ID equals high, right? I have to create a data key, then I have to create an internal hash, so another hash inside, which is also postcolon, and then that gets. Alright, so that's my complaint. Of all the things Haml does for me, I'll forgive it, right? That's a tiny problem, and any number of searches through Stack Overflow will show you the solution to that. And you may not initially know why, but you'll learn. So here's some samples, just to give you more concrete idea of using IDs versus classes. Just so you get to see it again. We're going to do this hands-on because we're going to write Haml eventually. So I wanted a div with ID logo and a class container. And I typed it wrong here in class. So my mistake, that should be container. And then we have an h3 with an ID happy. Right? Anything here that's throwing you off or you'd like some more coverage on, I'm more than happy to talk about. Like this part I could totally understand because it's new, very more unusual. Alright, the way I like to look at this is that, remember, this is on the same line as this, which means it'll be wrapped in that element. Right? So in these cases, it's not actually that much smaller, right? Because we're doing kind of trivial examples. Okay. So the cool part about templating engines, whether you're using Haml or ERB, is the idea you can create partials. Let's pretend, I'm not saying that you're going to do this, but let's pretend you did. Have you ever been to Amazon storefront and you do a search for a list of items? You're going to get a bunch of regularly sized and shaped and consistent sections of markup, which contain like an image and a price, or maybe if it's prime or not, repeated around the page. That kind of repetitious, templatable markup that you might actually even iterate it, right? You might have an array or a database loading that information, so you may have 60 today, you may have 65 tomorrow. So you're going to want to generate that page dynamically based on data you don't know about yet. that is a prime example of something that might be good as a partial. Because that same piece of information might also be usable when they're checking out. So you see a profile of all of the items, then you see the cart, and then the cart you have the same image and price. And is it prime, for example? That's where partials comes into play. It's a small file that contains a piece of markup that can then be included, rendered with the rest of your other pages later. So it's almost kind of like, and I say kind of like, making an HTML function, right? That's one way partials can be used. I'm stretching there, but if we use functions as a way of encapsulation and reuse of logic that's consistently the same, or maybe has a couple of properties that we're going to add as arguments that are different, it's one use for it. Now, another use for it that I think I probably use every single time, whereas the idea of using it in an e-com product is a little bit rarer. Navigation, headers, and footers. So, in your layout, you're going to probably put the navigation, header, and footer. But maybe you don't want to make the layout this huge monstrous file that has all your navigation, headers, and footers in there. Maybe you'd like to just work on the 10 lines that is your footer, for example, and keep that separate. Put it in partial. You include that with your layout later. If you ever need to move that code around, it's just moving that include. If you ever make a special page that deviates from your layout, you still can use it, right? Because it's now not copy and paste. Now, the added benefit of that kind of ability to duplicate means that you only edit it in one place too. So, in the old school days of building static websites, you'd have to copy and paste the header and navigation from every single one of your pages into the top of every single one of your pages. Let's say you came along and changed one of your menu items, and then forgot to update or save one of the pages before you uploaded it again. You'd have one page on your website that's navigation was slightly different than the rest. And then you look kind of like an idiot, just a little bit. Until someone notices it, tells you about it, you go up and you update it. By using things that allow you to take repeated bits of markup and stick them somewhere, you're kind of limiting your chances of making those mistakes. Right? So partials are probably, I mean, I could throw away the easy markup and go back to ERB. As long as they still had partials, which they do, I'd be happy camping. So if I was to think about partials in a way, just kind of put them in your head as they're little boxes of logic, of not logic, of markup, which you are likely to repeat. All right, let's see. So here's a little example of what partial syntax might look like, and I give you a trivial example of the repetition part. So I've created a partial tagline.html, .haml, I'm sorry. In another Haml file, whatever it is, index.haml, I'm going to render partial tagline. Then I'm going to do a little anchor tag to Google, and then another render partial. And my outcome will be, I will render this line, and then my link, and then this line again. Right, so that's what I'm doing. We're using that partial over and over again on the same page. And so that's all the Haml information I'm going to give you out of my mouth. Haml has a nice tutorial. They give you further examples, which are easily, some of them I've abused and taken for my own, and others are on more advanced items. They're good for when you're stuck. Go look at the documentation. That's basically what that is. You don't know what quite's wrong, go read about it. You'll probably figure it out. Because Haml's not that complicated, you shouldn't be able to identify it. You know, so you take a half an hour, you search for this, doesn't work out, you go ask somebody, you follow the pattern, you're good. Now, more important than that is this, Haml to HTML. So I call these tools, we have one for Haml, we have one for Sass. These are like my Rosetta Stones, right? I also use this when I do CoffeeScript. For me, reading the documentation of a thing is never gonna happen. Just never gonna read. I have ADD and my attention span is way too short to ever not be able to touch something, right? I have to press the keys. I'm a bit of a spaz. So I use tools like this which give me direct and immediate feedback, right? So I'm gonna open this so we can see what it looks like. Okay. So this will live convert HTML to Haml. Oops, O-tab. Right, so we did that. Now, let's say I want to add a class. Whoop. It just goes away. This also is useful in the sense that you have some HTML that you've written, or you truly understand how to write the HTML, but you just don't know what the Haml would be for that, because it's confusing. You know, like, let's do. So my favorite is the anchor tag, which, because of this language, is implement helpers for. Oh, I'm just mixing all my markup here. Right, so you don't quite know what to do with the attribute. This will give you the feedback. Right, HTML to Haml. It's my buddy.
Is that similar to that tool you had with the copy script and the?
Yeah, that's exactly the same thing. I guess I'll exit full screen mode. Go back to this. New. And then we'll go back. All right, so I call it a Rosetta Stone. Me. That's what it's that this equals that, and I can get that feedback. All right. I recommend it. It's probably going to be the fastest way you're going to learn the little nuances of anything.
Does it go back and forth?
There are ones like Haml to HTML as well, but they're not as good, I've noticed. And I have to admit, a lot of HTML to Haml converters aren't great. So I wouldn't use them to like convert whole projects. I really consider them more of a learning tool. I have this thing in my head that I know will work. How do I, because you don't want to do this like copy pasta thing with it, right? Where you put something in there and hope it comes out the other side correctly. That is probably going to lead you down a path of pain. Because I've noticed that oftentimes those converters will accidentally steal attributes and lose them. So you can't always trust their output explicitly. They're good. So the next preprocessor is Sass. So we covered a preprocessor that handles making markup pretty and giving us some extra tools to make that markup more manageable. So now we're going to do the same thing with CSS. Sass stands for Syntactically Awesome Style Sheets. There's a Ruby concept of sugar. We make the code sweet. We put tools and we put symbols in that makes it lovely. We call it sugar. Sass is kind of another one of those sugars. It adds things that makes writing CSS pleasing to a programmer. And so what is CSS definitely not got in it? Let me just ask that question. Who can tell me what CSS does not do?
Nesting.
Well, yes. No, I mean, it doesn't do any logic whatsoever, right? It mirrors HTML in that way. There's no logic, right? So CSS is also dumb. And we have to build such intricate things, though, with CSS, that just gets painful. Many projects, you'll notice CSS files are easily over 1,000 lines. It's just not uncommon. And that's okay. We just shouldn't have to feel we have to write all that. Right?
So Verb and Need alone don't provide any actual styles, so you need to write them all yourself. Bitters throws in some styles for you so that you have a kind of prettier starting point for the stuff you look at.
I know that the one thing I've noticed, and I'm sure there's plenty of things it actually adds, but one thing I've noticed is that it makes all your font colors not black. No, it's something I learned. No. I'm gonna tell you an honest thing. I'm design challenged. But using these tools, I've built things that don't suck. And I still am not, like I've almost used this as a way of learning how like designs can look nice so that I can repeat the pattern. Because I myself did not take art classes, and my mother was a painter, but I rebelled, and I became an engineer. So this is beautiful to me. And so that black thing I know seems like a really trivial thing, but you learn that you should never have black text on a white background because it's too sharp or something of that nature.
Too much contrast.
It's too much contrast, so that you soften it. It's almost black. It's just about black. Like it's all 7s or something. Like I mean, it's like really close to black, but it's beautiful. Like it makes the page soft and beautiful. And I would never have had that had Mel not introduced me to bitters, because I used bourbon and neat before bitters really kind of was like published and existed. That I noticed, and then I'd been using it for like a year and a half, and then she's like, "Why are you not using bitters in this project, you jerk?" She didn't say the jerk part, no, but you know, she was like aghast that somehow I had missed out on bitters, and I had. And then she brought me back in. So basic styles and variables for bourbon projects is what they say, but Mel's description is much better. That it provides some standard typography that helps you make beautiful things with these tools. And exactly, bourbon and neat provide nothing on their own. We can install bourbon and neat, we can include them in our CSS file and compile it, and nothing will be added, right? And that's the beauty. That's actually something gorgeous, because we're adding no weight. All right, so let's install bourbon, neat, and bitters, okay? So because bourbon is required by neat, we don't have to install it. We can install neat, and we can install bitters. All right, so let me tell you the line, part of this line. I had used some markdown, and I thought that it would look a little bit cleaner, but it doesn't. So I can use a marker because we're using this special thing, right? So this goes in your gem file, which is at the root of your project.
So you have a wiggly rocket up there.
Yes. So this is a part of semantic version. I'll let you guys type this. I'll let you start running the installer. Because we're going to do that when we run bundle install. And then I'll tell you what that little squiggly thing is.
Tilda.
It's a tilde greater than symbol. Yeah. You put it in your gem file. So in the very base of your project, there's a gem file.
Yeah, and I'm sure I'm gonna type every, need the board to.
So, I did this wrong. Hold on. It's over here. Each line starts with gem.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, I made that
Anywhere in
mistake.
that
That's
file?
added. Well, see.
Just like at the end or something?
Yep, and this one.
So it's gem, space,
Languages.
neat.
I get really irritated because it seems adding, you know.
Oh.
I know that I must stop there, but.
You want to include bitters?
No, I mean, there's no need to lock it at the version.
Question,
Yeah, what's up?
yeah, is that from the, you're not doing that in the command line, are you?
No, there's a file called the gem file in your project.
Do that either.
At the root.
And then,
Just the gem file.
Not the law, right. Just the gem file, plain and simple. The gem file.lock will be updated when we run bundle. And it's kind of like it tells us what things are fixed at. So we have some kind of like, if you gave me a project with your lock file, when I run bundle, I'll get the versions that are in the lock file,
now you go back.
even if you don't have the versions listed. So like I've added the version to the gem command.
Yeah.
Look for it. Stop it.
Yeah.